Welcome to the Wife Stories YouTube channel. New video every day, and don't forget to subscribe. Here we go.
I was washing my hands for so long that my fingertips started to wrinkle. The water in the basin ran hot, steaming the mirror, trickling over my wrists, leaving my skin red and raw. I just stood there, staring at the swirling drain, feeling a cold ache in my chest that no heat could chase away. I couldn't stop. Some part of me thought that if I scrubbed hard enough, maybe I'd wash off everything that had stuck to me. The suspicion, the betrayal, the taste of regret. But it stayed, stubborn as a scar. "Behind me," she said. "I don't have to explain." Her voice was quiet, yet sharp enough to cut. And I froze. I shut off the faucet, water dripping from my hands, my heartbeat drowning in my ears. I turned to face her. My wife, Jane, stood by the door of our bathroom. Her eyes were wide, but her chin was lifted in that stubborn way I'd seen 1,000 times. In that moment, everything we'd built seemed to hover on a knife's edge. She was the woman I'd loved fiercely for 15 years, mother of our 2 boys, the same woman who used to rest her head on my shoulder and whisper that she couldn't imagine life without me. Now, confronted, she looked at me as though I were a stranger. Or maybe she felt cornered, like I'd forced her to speak. I still had no words. She broke the silence first. "I don't have to explain how I feel, what I think, or what happened." She drew a quick breath. "Not if you're just going to judge me." I lowered my hands to my sides. They were dripping, a slow patter onto the tile. "I'm not judging," I said, though my voice came out rough, like I had gravel in my throat. I need to know. I'm your husband. I have a right to know what's going on in my own home." She shook her head, stepped back, and turned away. The door clicked behind her, leaving me alone with the steady drip of water. I pressed the heels of my hands to my eyes. I wanted so badly to remain calm, to keep the anger in check. But inside, I was on fire. My stomach was twisted into a tight, painful knot. My father used to tell me, "Never let your anger talk for you." I tried to live by that. Always keep composure, always remain the level-headed one. But we all have our breaking point. I dried my hands on a towel and stepped into the hallway. Our bedroom door was half open, the bed we'd shared for so many years slightly unmade. Sunlight from the window stretched across the carpet. For a moment, I thought of the day we bought those sheets. Jane had insisted on getting the finest cotton, so they'd last for years. She said we'd be old and gray together, sleeping on the same set. That memory felt like a hollow echo. Downstairs, I heard clinking plates and the faint whir of the coffee machine. My wife was in the kitchen, probably making breakfast. But there was an odd distance in the sound, as if the normal routines of our life had become a stage play, and we were just actors, reading lines we no longer believed. I went to the sink and poured a glass of water. Each gulp tasted flat heavy. I recalled the day everything started to unravel. A week ago. A month. Or maybe it had been unraveling for a long time, only I was too blind to see. The memory came back in fragments, out of order. It began with something small. I was at my office, signing paperwork, minding my own business. The usual grind. And then I bumped into our CEO's secretary, a timid young woman with tear-streaked mascara, who was carrying a stack of folders. She looked at me with puffy eyes and whispered, "Your wife. She visits the boss sometimes, right?" I remember the uneasy expression on her face. "She's been here a lot lately. With Michael. She fiddled with her pen. She goes into his office. They, spend time." Something in her voice told me I shouldn't ask more. She was obviously on the verge of tears for her own reasons. Maybe she'd just broken up with someone, or maybe she hated her job. But the words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Jane comes here often. She meets with Michael." That day, the drive home was a blur. I had so many questions, but no real answers. At first, I told myself it had to be innocent. Jane did freelance marketing work. Michael was a creative director. They had reason to discuss projects. But then, I found the text messages. I wasn't snooping. Her phone had buzzed on the kitchen table. She was in the shower, and the name Michael glowed on the screen. I saw the line of text in the preview. Just a few words. "Can't stop thinking about you." That was the first dagger. I tried telling myself it could be harmless, a misleading phrase, maybe a snippet from an ad concept, but we both knew better. I confronted her that night around the dinner table after the kids had gone upstairs. She denied any wrongdoing. She said it was just a professional conversation, he was flirting, and she didn't shut it down. She said nothing had happened. I remember how she laughed and rolled her eyes, calling me paranoid. I wanted to believe her so bad that I pushed the doubt aside. But the next day, I drove to her usual coffee spot. She'd left that morning after telling me she had errands, freelance meetings. I found her car parked near the building of the advertising agency. I sat there, engine idling, until I saw them exit together. Michael, tall, well-dressed, a hint of cocky confidence in the set of his shoulders. She was right next to him, smiling in a way I hadn't seen for a while. My breath caught in my chest. They didn't kiss, at least not outside. But I saw the way he touched her arm, the way she tilted her head toward him, smiling like he was the only person in the world. That single moment threatened to tear me apart. I swallowed it down and went home, telling myself I needed proof. Hard proof, because Jane was an intelligent, careful woman. She didn't leave obvious clues. We'd been married more than a decade, and I knew she was measured in every move. If she was truly crossing that line, I had to be sure before I said or did something irreversible. A few days later, I found that proof. I wish I could say I didn't go looking for it, but that would be a lie. She left her laptop on the living room table, open, and logged into her email. My heart hammered as I scrolled through. There they were, messages from Michael's personal account. It started innocently enough. He praised her for her creativity. She thanked him. They talked about a small marketing pitch. Then the messages began to shift in tone, turning warm, flirtatious, full of subtle compliments that escalated to something else. Words like, "I crave you," then one in which she described the silky dress she'd wear for their next meeting, and how she couldn't wait to peel it off. My mind went blank reading that. Something inside me hollowed out. I remember my hands trembling on the keyboard as I read further. It was like I was forcing myself to stare directly at a wound. Images, suggestions, times, and places they'd met. The tone got more explicit, and I found references to a hotel near his office. My face burned. My lungs felt like they were collapsing. So it was real. Not just a crush. Not just a passing flirtation. She was with him, physically, intimately. My throat closed up. We'd slept in the same bed for 15 years, built a life, raised 2 boys. And now she was doing that with him. I still remember the text in which she described how his mouth felt on her neck. The desperation in my chest turned to white-hot rage, and I realized I was shaking, my knuckles turning white against the laptop. That was the moment I knew there was no going back to normal, no more illusions. I snapped the computer shut and just sat there for a while, adrenaline pounding in my veins. She came home an hour later, groceries in her arms. I must have looked insane, pacing the living room. She set the bags down and stared at me. "What's wrong?" she said, glancing around, seeing the tension in my shoulders. I didn't speak. I simply opened the laptop again and slid it across the table so she could see the emails on the screen. She froze, color draining from her face. For a long moment, neither of us said a word. Then, in a trembling voice, she started, "I can explain." That's when I lost it. My voice roared out of me, raw and painful. "Explain what? How long? Since when have you been lying to me?" The words tumbled over each other, and I slammed my fist on the table. The kids were away at a friend's, thank God. I was beyond caring about composure or politeness. I wanted answers. She tried to speak, but my voice hammered through. I spat out every tortured question that had been festering in my mind. Did you do it in our bed? Have you both laughed at me behind my back? Does he kiss you like I used to? Is it better? I saw tears form in her eyes. She stumbled over her words, something about feeling lonely, unappreciated, that it started off as emotional support, blossomed into something she couldn't control. You've been so distant, she cried. You focus on work, on money, on the children's schedules. And I'm just invisible. I needed to feel alive. That was her big explanation. She needed to feel alive. As if the daily life we shared, the family bond, the quiet nights, the routine, weren't enough. It felt like she was putting the blame on me for not noticing how lonely she was. And maybe I was partly to blame. I'd grown comfortable, maybe too certain of her. I wasn't the romantic man I used to be. But none of that justified betrayal. None of it gave her the right to sneak around with Michael. We circled each other in that living room, voices raised, eyes wet. She said it just happened, that it was an accident, that she felt guilty. And I laughed, short and bitter, telling her that nobody just accidentally ends up in a hotel bed half-naked, moaning someone else's name. She flinched at the crudeness of my words, but I needed her to feel the weight of what she'd done. In the days that followed, everything was a blur. We still slept in the same house. I spent hours silent, drifting through the motions. She tried to talk sometimes, to patch the gaping wound. But at that point, her voice was like static to me. The children sensed the tension, so we both tried to hide it around them. At night, we'd lie in the dark, backs turned, barely breathing. That's the worst kind of loneliness. Lying next to someone who used to be your entire world, feeling the gulf so wide you can hardly speak her name. I remember the moment I found her alone in the kitchen. She was gazing out the window at the backyard, arms folded across her chest. My chest felt tight, but I forced myself to approach. We needed to talk. I came up behind her, and she turned, her eyes red-rimmed from tears. She whispered something that made my stomach twist. I wanted him, she said, even when we didn't do anything yet. That's still a betrayal, isn't it? She looked at me with a strange, pleading sorrow. Sometimes I'd fantasize about him even while we were together. I bit back a surge of rage, because if I let it out, I might have shattered something or someone. Instead, I nodded slowly, clenched my fist, until my nails dug into my palm. Why are you telling me this now? I rasped. She shrugged, tears spilling silently. Because you asked what happened, and this is me, explaining. That it was in my head first. I'm sorry. She paused. I'm sorry, but I can't pretend it never happened. That was the night I decided to confront Michael. I went to his workplace, an edgy advertising firm downtown with glass doors and modern art on the walls. I asked the receptionist for him. She gave me a polite smile, clearly noticing how tense I was, but she led me to his office anyway. He was sitting behind a sleek metal desk. He recognized me in an instant. Maybe Jane showed him my photo, or perhaps he'd seen me around with management. He stood up, smoothing his shirt, and tried a friendly smile. Josh, right? Good to see you. Bah, Jane's not here. I cut him off. Yeah, I know she's not here. I shut the door behind me, ignoring the curious looks from his coworkers through the glass walls. I want to talk to you. About her. He offered a seat, which I refused. He hesitated, leaning back against his desk. He was about my height but more slender, definitely younger, an air of confidence in his posture. My hands itched for a confrontation, but I told myself, keep it verbal. Don't throw your life away with violence. Michael swallowed. Listen, man, I know this is awkward. I never meant. I don't want to hear the usual lines, I said. You knew she was married. You knew we have children. And yet you. I broke off, my voice cracking with anger and hurt that threatened to spill. Why? His face shifted from attempted politeness to something defensive. We just clicked. It got out of hand. We didn't plan it. I care about her. If it's any consolation, I never wanted to hurt you or break up a family. I wanted to punch him. I wanted to see that smug mouth bleed, but I forced my fists to stay at my sides. You got me curious, I said, how a man looks himself in the mirror after hooking up with a married woman. Did you even think about what this does to me, to our kids? He bit his lip. For a moment, I saw something close to guilt flicker in his eyes. But it passed. He straightened, as if gathering some leftover pride. I'm sorry, he said, though he didn't sound especially sorry. If you want me to leave her alone, consider it done. I'll end it. My throat felt tight. That was all he had to offer. I'll end it. Like it was a fling, an inconvenience. What if I told you it's too late? The damage is already done, I said. There's no going back to what it was. He exhaled. I know. Then, to my shock, he actually reached out, as if to put a hand on my shoulder, but I stepped away with an icy glare. He let his hand drop. Look, maybe it's best if you and Jane figure out your marriage. I'm not. He trailed off, searching for words. I'm not the villain here. I swallowed the scalding retort rising in my throat. Instead, I forced a tight nod. You're right. You're not the only villain. She made her choice. Then I turned and walked out, ignoring the tension in my chest. People glanced at me with worried stares, but I barely registered them. I got to my car, slammed the door, and let out a scream that tore at my throat. I remember pounding the steering wheel, tears burning my eyes. The humiliation was suffocating. The sense that my entire marriage was worthless threatened to crush me. I'd given her everything, or so I thought. She was my anchor, and now I realized that anchor had drifted, leaving me floundering in dark waters. That night, I confronted Jane again. We sat in the living room. The kids had gone to a neighbor's for a sleepover. I told her I'd seen Michael. I told her that he'd said he would end it, and she should confirm that. She listened quietly, hands trembling in her lap. Then she murmured, "Yes, it's over." I told him I can't do this anymore. A wave of conflicting emotions crashed inside me. Part of me felt relief. Part of me felt furious that it had ever begun. I looked at her face, pale, drawn, tears collecting at the corners of her eyes. Suddenly, I realized how exhausted she looked, how broken. And stupidly, some paternal instinct in me wanted to protect her from that pain, even though she was the one who caused mine. But I couldn't hold that position. The betrayal was too raw. She whispered, "Joshua, I'm sorry," then reached for my hand. Her fingertips were cold, trembling. I stared at those fingers, remembering how they used to glide across my chest in bed, how they'd tangle in my hair when we kissed. Now they felt foreign. I pulled away, and she gasped as if I'd slapped her. She tried again to explain. I was lonely. It was a mistake. I needed something else. Her voice cracked. I felt my own voice choked off by a combination of anger, heartbreak, and pity. I wanted to lash out. I also wanted to hold her. The internal conflict nearly tore me apart. Finally, I told her we needed professional counseling. Otherwise, I didn't see a path forward. She shook her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Whatever you want," she said in a whisper. "If it means you'll stay." That's when I realized how complicated it would be to just walk away. We had 2 boys, a mortgage, a history. But oh, how I wanted revenge. That word, vengeance, pulsed in my mind, like a red-hot brand searing my brain. She had stabbed me in the back, humiliated me. Shouldn't I make her feel a fraction of that pain? But every time I looked at her tear-streaked face, or at the pictures of our children smiling on the mantel, my resolve wavered. A few days later, I found a small hotel receipt in her purse from a date that predated my discovery, and something inside me snapped all over again. She told me it was only a few times, but this receipt suggested it had started earlier. That evening, I stormed into the kitchen, tossed that receipt onto the table. She froze, one hand gripping the edge of the countertop. My voice came out hoarse. "Care to explain this?" She looked down at the slip of paper, then back up at me. The color drained from her cheeks. For a second, she looked so guilty I almost felt triumphant in my heartbreak. Then she said, "I don't have to explain," echoing the words I'd heard earlier, but this time, it sounded like defiance. My fists clenched, nails biting into my palms. The tension between us pulsed. This was my wife, the mother of my children, the woman who used to slip secret love notes into my briefcase. And now here she stood, refusing to justify her own betrayal. I felt an ugly, bitter laugh escape me. "Fine, don't explain, but don't expect me to stay silent." I strode away, my heart slamming so hard in my chest I thought I might pass out. I started drinking more heavily that week. Not in front of the kids, but late at night, alone in my study, swirling whiskey in a glass. I'd think about the times we used to go to the beach with the boys, or how her face lit up when we slow danced at our wedding. Then I'd picture her pressed against Michael, a man nearly 7 years younger than me, a creative hotshot with no kids and no anchor. I'd picture her letting him kiss the same lips she once told me were only mine. The alcohol was the only thing that dulled the pain enough to sleep. In that numb haze, a plan for revenge started to form. I wanted her to hurt as I hurt, but I also wanted to be strategic. Something told me to get my finances in order, to protect myself, to consult a lawyer, to ensure that if she insisted on leaving, or if we ended up divorcing, she wouldn't take everything. I knew it was cruel, but in the thick of betrayal, I felt justified. Meanwhile, Jane tried to keep up the facade of a normal household. She helped the boys with homework, made dinner, tried to talk to me in gentle, measured tones, but my fury simmered just beneath the surface. At night, I'd watch her from across the table, trying to see if there was any remorse in her eyes, or if she was thinking about him, replaying some memory in her head. Sometimes I'd lash out with a sharp, sarcastic comment, and she'd flinch. Then I'd catch myself, remembering the children were present, and I'd swallow the rest of my rage. I felt like I was rotting from the inside out. About a week later, we attended one of those counseling sessions I'd insisted on. The therapist's office was small, tastefully decorated, with soft gray chairs arranged in a circle. The air smelled faintly of lavender. The therapist, a middle-aged woman with a kind face, asked us to express our feelings in a safe environment. Jane spoke first, her voice trembling, about how she'd felt invisible, how she missed the connection we used to share. My stomach twisted with resentment. I felt my teeth grind at her words. Invisible. I'd never told her to vanish. She chose to drift. She chose to find that connection in Michael's bed. When it was my turn, the anger exploded from me. My voice shook. I told them both how humiliating it was to discover your wife in explicit email exchanges with another man. How I felt betrayed, emasculated. My throat grew raw, my eyes burned, but I forced the words out. I couldn't look at Jane as I spoke. I knew if I met her eyes, I might break down, might do something I regretted. The therapist tried to steer us toward calm reflection, encouraging us to find empathy. But all I could picture was the two of them in some cheap hotel room. I felt my blood pressure spike and had to rub my temples to stave off a headache. By the end of the session, I was more drained than ever. Jane seemed equally shattered, tears shining in her eyes. We didn't speak on the drive home. The tension was thick. When we got inside, she touched my arm gently, her expression pleading. "I know it's awful. I know I destroyed us. But maybe we can salvage something." Her voice cracked, and I felt that paternal sting again, wanting to hold her, shield her from my own fury. But I steeled myself. "Don't ask me to pretend this never happened," I said hoarsely, "or that I can just forget and move on." She nodded, tears slipping down. We stayed there in the entryway, neither moving, until I finally walked upstairs, leaving her standing alone. That night, I dreamt of the ocean, from my childhood in Texas. In the dream, I was swimming, struggling against the current, while Jane stood on the shore with Michael. They were laughing, arms around each other, oblivious to my frantic splashing as the current dragged me under. I woke up gasping for air, sweat soaking my sheets. For a moment, I felt disoriented. She was lying next to me, breathing softly, her back turned. All the old warmth was gone. I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding, my mind racing with that familiar word, revenge. The next morning, I found myself in the bathroom, washing my hands too long again. Water scalded my skin, but I didn't stop. My thoughts drifted in 100 directions. I recalled the conversation I'd had with a lawyer earlier in the week. She'd given me a list of documents to gather if I wanted to protect my assets. I'd quietly started collecting bank statements, pay stubs, the mortgage agreement. Part of me hated stooping to that. Part of me felt it was necessary. When I came downstairs, Jane was in the kitchen, hair pulled into a loose ponytail, her cheeks drawn. She glanced up, but neither of us spoke. I poured myself coffee. My voice shook as I said, "I'm going for a drive." She nodded wordlessly. I left without another glance. I was out on the highway for what felt like hours. The radio turned off, just me and my thoughts. My father's voice rang in my head. Never let your anger talk for you. But what if anger was the only language left? I felt consumed by it. I craved a way to make her feel what I felt. Powerless, exposed, full of regret. Maybe that made me monstrous. Maybe it was just human nature. I parked at a lookout near the lake and stared at the water. Memories of our wedding day cycled through my mind. How Jane had looked in her ivory dress, the tears in her eyes as she said her vows, the feeling that we were destined for an unbreakable bond. How naive that seemed now. Our bond had cracked the second she welcomed another man's touch. Eventually, I drove back home. The boys were in the living room, playing a video game. I forced a smile, ruffled their hair, asked how they were doing. They chattered happily about school and the next soccer practice. I nodded, my chest aching, wishing I could freeze them in this moment, keep them untouched by the mess we'd made. Jane hovered in the hallway, watching us. That night, after the kids were asleep, she approached me in the bedroom. "I miss you," she whispered. I couldn't look at her face. I missed the way we used to talk. Talk about what? I said, bitterness creeping into my tone. About how we trusted each other. About how we'd never betray each other's secrets. Her shoulders slumped. She looked at me with eyes so full of sorrow, I almost felt pity. "I know you hate me," she said, voice trembling. "And I deserve it. But I'm still here. I'm still the mother of your children. I still love you." I forced a harsh laugh. "Love me? You sure? Or do you mean you love the security, the house, the shared life you built with me? So now you can't just run off?" She flinched, tears gathering in her eyes. Then, to my surprise, she stepped forward and tried to embrace me. I felt her arms circle my waist, her face press against my chest. My entire body went rigid. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was so familiar and yet so foreign. She whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I let her hold me, though my arms remained stiff at my sides. My heartbeat thundered. Part of me wanted to crush her in my arms, bury my face in her hair, let out all the tears I'd been choking on. But the other part reminded me of the emails, the hotel receipts, the phone calls. I gently pushed her away, stepped back, and watched her expression crumble. Days bowled into weeks. She did end it with Michael. So she claimed, but I was paranoid, expecting to catch them again. I checked her phone logs, her emails, her texts. Every time I saw his name, I felt a surge of nausea. She told me she'd blocked him. She cried that she only wanted us to work, that she'd do anything to fix the damage. She suggested we go out, try to rekindle some spark. We did, eventually, have a night out, leaving the kids with my parents. We went to a quiet restaurant. ate dinner in near silence. The conversation was strained, the air thick with unresolved guilt. She reached across the table to touch my hand, and I didn't pull away this time, but I felt numb, like my hand was made of stone. Back home, we sat on the couch, and I poured whiskey for both of us. We sipped quietly. The tension grew until I finally said, "Why him?" My voice sounded dead, monotone. She stared at her glass. "I don't know. He was new, exciting. He made me feel seen." She swallowed hard. "I know that sounds shallow, but it's the truth." "Seen," I echoed, bitterness lining my voice. "I guess that's something I never managed to do." "Ah, that's not fair," she whispered. "You did. In the early years you did." She trailed off, her eyes fluttering shut, tears running down her cheeks. "I don't have an excuse. I just messed up. Horribly. And now I live with it." Her confession might have been cathartic, but for me, it was like rubbing salt in an open wound. Yet something in her words, in her trembling voice, told me she was telling the truth. No lies or rationalizations, just naked regret. Our conversation drifted to the kids, to the future, to the possibility of divorce. I watched her face as I brought up the word. She looked terrified. "If that's what you need," she said shakily, "I'll sign the papers. I won't fight you. I can't force you to stay." I stared at the wedding band on her finger. It caught the dim lamplight, mocking me with its polished surface. "I haven't decided," I said, and it was the truth. Half of me wanted out, to rip the memories from my chest, to be done with her. The other half was bound to her by so much history and the children. And that's when an idea for revenge surfaced in my mind. Stay, but keep her on edge. Let her feel the tension every single day. Let her atone in 1,000 small humiliations. I hated myself for even thinking it, but I couldn't deny how tempting it was. If I left, she could run free, possibly even chase Michael again. If I stayed, I could keep them both under my watch. And in the end, maybe I'd come out with some twisted sense of justice. So I decided to stay, for now. We told the children we were working through some grown-up stuff, that we loved them very much and everything would be okay. A half-truth at best. I kept going to counseling with her, kept up appearances, all the while nursing the dark coil of anger inside me. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, I found her sitting in the living room, lights low, a single lamp illuminating her figure. She was wearing an old sweatshirt and leggings, hair pulled back, face drawn with exhaustion. I sat across from her, the quiet ticking of the clock the only sound. She said softly, "Do you want to ask me anything else?" "I'll answer, even if it hurts." I studied her face. "Why do that to me? To us?" I asked, though it echoed a question I'd asked a dozen times. "Didn't you ever stop and think about me? About the boys?" She swallowed. "Sometimes I did. But I was in a fog. I was foolish, selfish. I didn't want to see the consequences." Her voice trembled. "And now, I pay for it every day. I see it in your eyes. I feel the wall between us." I closed my eyes, inhaled slowly. My mind flickered to the memory of my father's lessons. He taught me how to fish, how to tie a tie, how to keep calm under pressure. He also told me that when someone is drowning, and if they start to pull you under, you have to protect yourself. "They'll claw at you, drag you down," he said. "Don't let them." Was that Jane now? Was she drowning and trying to drag me into her undertow? I sighed, standing up. "I'm going to bed," I muttered. I heard her soft weeping as I walked away, and though my heart tightened, I forced myself not to turn around. In the following weeks, we hovered in that fragile space between a broken marriage and a desperate attempt to salvage it. She tried to show her remorse in small ways, preparing my favorite meals, leaving notes on my desk that said she was sorry for the pain she caused. But each gesture felt hollow. We both knew the real healing would take more than sweet words and gestures. I threw myself into my work, often staying late, My manager asked me if everything was all right, noticing my dark circles and short temper. I lied, of course. On the outside, I was functional. Inside, I was a storm. Then, one day, I saw Michael again. He came to my office, looking awkward and uneasy. He said he was there for a meeting with upper management, but he recognized me, and we ended up sharing a cramped elevator ride. We didn't speak until the doors opened. Then he had the nerve to murmur, "Everything okay?" I almost laughed in his face. Was he really asking if everything was okay? The man who slid into my wife's bed, set fire to my world, now wanted to check on me. I forced a tight smile, whispered, "Never better," then walked away. I could feel him watching me go, probably full of guilt or maybe relief that I hadn't confronted him in front of everyone. A new wave of bitterness surged in me, and I spent the rest of the day pacing, snapping at coworkers, unable to focus. When I got home, I found the boys playing in the backyard. Jane was on the patio, watering the rose bushes. She looked up, gave me a tentative smile. I nodded stiffly and went inside. That evening, my older son asked me to help with some homework. I stood over his shoulder, explaining math problems. But my mind drifted. I realized how innocent he was, how he had no clue about the turmoil raging under our roof. My younger son came bounding in, wanting to show me a picture he'd drawn. I knelt down and ruffled his hair, praising his work. Part of me felt an acute, stinging guilt. I was failing them by not being fully present. My anger was overshadowing everything. But I couldn't just snap my fingers and fix it. Later, I was in the garage, rummaging through old tools, trying to find something to occupy my mind. Jane appeared in the doorway, her expression hesitant. She said quietly, "Can we talk?" I set down the wrench in my hand. "Sure." She stepped inside, hugging her elbows. The overhead light cast harsh shadows across her face. I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry if my attempts to make it up to you feel forced. I know it'll take more than that. I can't live with this silence. It's killing me." I took a slow breath. "I know." I paused, picking at a groove in the workbench. "It's killing me too." She inched closer. "Do you still want to do the counseling? Because if it's not helping, maybe we need something else. Or maybe you just need space or time." Time. That was the only honest remedy I could think of. But I wasn't sure time would fix the hole in my heart. I nodded. "We'll keep going, one day at a time." She studied my face, her eyes wet. Then she touched my arm gently. "I wish I could turn back time," she whispered. "I'd give anything." "Me too," I said, voice cracking. There in the stark light of the garage for the first time in weeks, I let my arms slip around her waist. I held her, stiffly at first, but then my grip tightened. She trembled, a small sob escaping her, and I found tears burning my own eyes. I hated what she'd done, but a part of me still loved her. And that love gnawed at me, making everything more complicated. Days passed. The kids sensed some improvement, or at least a thaw in the ice. Jane and I managed to speak civilly without cutting each other with every sentence. But the old familiarity was gone, replaced by cautious courtesy. At night, I'd sometimes feel her hand on my shoulder. I'd roll over, see her eyes searching mine. We'd lie there in the dark, breathing each other's air, but not quite bridging the gap. Once or twice, we tried to make love, in a tentative, sorrowful way. I'd see flickers of guilt in her eyes. I'm sure she saw anger in mine. It was a painful attempt at reconnecting, overshadowed by Michael's presence in my mind. Through it all, I kept thinking about revenge. My father's old words repeated themselves. "Don't save someone who'll drag you down." But I was entangled. She was my wife, mother of our kids, the woman who once made me the happiest man alive. How could I just throw her away like garbage? Yet part of me was sickened by the thought of living with her betrayal every day. Eventually, the tension escalated to a final confrontation. It happened late one night, after a rough counseling session that had dredged up more anger than resolution. We came home, put the kids to bed, and then found ourselves in the living room, facing each other like two weary boxers. My voice shook with a raw edge. I can't keep living in this half-state. Either we fight for our marriage with everything we have, or we admit it's done and walk away. Jane's eyes brimmed with tears. I'm fighting, she said, voice cracking. I'm here, aren't I? I let out a shaky breath, raking my fingers through my hair. Fine. Then no more half-truths. Tell me everything, even the ugly details. I need to know. I need to hear it from your lips, or else I'll keep imagining the worst. She paled. Don't make me do that. I clenched my jaw, feeling like a terrible person for demanding it, but the need burned inside me. I have to know what I'm trying to forgive. She swallowed, tears sliding down her cheeks. Then, in a trembling voice, she told me about the hotel room, how he touched her, how she'd felt wanted. She described his compliments, his desire, the excitement. She confessed how she'd planned it in her mind for days, feeling guilty but unable to stop. She broke down sobbing when she described the moment they fell into bed together. I felt like I was going to vomit. My pulse pounded so hard I thought I might black out. That's enough, I finally said, voice hollow. I can't hear anymore. She collapsed onto the couch, hiding her face in her hands. I'm so sorry, she choked out. I'm so sorry. My vision blurred with hot tears. I turned away, pressing my fist to my mouth to stifle the anguished sob that threatened to break free. The pain in my chest was beyond words, but there was also a grim relief in hearing it. Now I knew. No illusions, no sanitized version. She'd chosen to give herself to another man, and she'd come home to me, pretended life was normal. I stood there, breathing hard, staring at the floor. Images crowded my mind. I wanted to lash out, to fling an accusation that would tear her down as thoroughly as her confession had torn me. But then I looked at her, folded over with guilt, her shoulders shaking. My voice came out hoarse. Get out. She lifted her face, eyes red and swollen. Whoa, what? Get out. I repeated. Go to your sisters, your friends. I don't care. I can't look at you right now. She nodded, hiccuping tears, and slowly got up. She walked to the bedroom, grabbed a small bag, and returned. Before she left, she turned to me. I love you, she whispered brokenly. I'm so sorry. I didn't respond. I just stared at her, my expression carved in stone. She shut the door behind her, and in the silence that followed, I felt the final break in what we once had. For the next few days, she stayed with her sister. The boys asked why Mom wasn't home, and I told them she had some personal things to handle. They seemed worried, but I assured them everything was fine. Inside, I was anything but fine. I walked around the empty house, the quiet rooms, feeling like a ghost haunting my own life. That's when my father's advice about drowning people returned to me. Maybe that was it. She was drowning in guilt, or loneliness, or dissatisfaction, and in the process, she pulled me under. If I kept letting her, we'd both sink. So I had a choice: cut her loose or extend a hand and risk her pulling me down again. One evening, I sat at my desk with a glass of whiskey. The ring of the phone broke the silence. It was Jane, her voice shaky. How are the kids? She asked softly. They're okay, I answered stiffly. A pause. How are you? I bit back the 1,000 angry words that rushed to the surface. Instead, I said, alive. She sniffled. I'm sorry. Do you want me to come by? I'd like to see the boys. If that's okay. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to shout no, that she should stay away forever. But the children needed their mother. And part of me needed to see her face, if only to confirm what I felt. Come tomorrow, I said, and hung up before she could say more. She arrived the next afternoon, wearing a simple sweater and jeans, her eyes nervous. The boys rushed to hug her, and she embraced them fiercely. I stood aside, arms folded, uncertain how to feel. She looked up at me, quietly said, "Can we talk?" I led her into the living room. We sat facing each other. She clasped her hands in her lap. "I understand if you want a divorce," she began softly. "I won't fight you. I'll sign whatever you need. I've done enough damage." My chest constricted. "You think that makes it easier?" She shook her head, tears brimming. "No, I know it doesn't, but I can't bear to make this worse for you." The silence stretched. "And if I said I wasn't sure I wanted to end it?" I asked at length. Her eyes flickered with a fragile hope. "I'd be here, waiting, if you let me." I lowered my gaze to the carpet, trying to gather my thoughts. We have 15 years together. We have 2 amazing boys. Part of me wants to try to rebuild something, no matter how impossible it feels. I swallowed, forcing the next words out. "But I'll be honest, I don't know how to forgive you for what you've done." She nodded, tears slipping free. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn that forgiveness." We sat in hushed tension. Eventually, I let out a shaky breath. "I'll let you come back. Not for me. For the kids. We'll keep going to counseling. But if I see any sign that you're still pining for him or lying to me," my voice wavered, "I'm done. Forever." She reached out, covering my hand with hers. "I understand," she whispered. That was the day she moved back in. The tension was thick, but it was a step. Some would call me a fool. Maybe I was, yet I had to see if there was a path forward. Over the following weeks, we attended more counseling sessions, had more gut-wrenching conversations, nights of tears and tentative touches. I still dreamed of revenge, of letting her taste my bitterness every single day. But something softened in me when I saw her genuine remorse. She was different, quieter, more introspective, less sure of herself. The arrogant defiance I glimpsed that day with the hotel receipt was gone. I began to realize that in punishing her, I was punishing myself too. The more I froze her out, the more I poisoned any hope of regaining peace. So, slowly, painfully, I tried to let the anger unwind. Not forgive entirely, not forget, but at least open a crack in the wall. We had good days, where we managed to laugh at some small joke, or watch a movie with the boys and wrap arms around each other on the couch. We had bad days, where a single reminder of Michael would ignite a fight that left us both raw and exhausted. But we kept going. One afternoon, I found her sobbing quietly in the laundry room, a towel clutched to her chest. She told me she felt unworthy, that she hated herself for what she'd done, that every morning she woke up thinking I'd be gone. I stood there, uncertain. Then I gently took the towel from her, set it aside, and wrapped my arms around her. She wept into my shoulder, and I just held her, feeling my own eyes grow damp. I realized that for all my anger, I still loved her in some deep, complicated way. We both wept, and for a moment, we were just 2 broken people clinging to each other in the wreckage. Time inched forward. The memory of her affair remained a sharp thorn, but the wound began to form a scab. She cut all ties with Michael, quit working with him, found new freelance clients. She handed me her phone whenever I wanted, showed me her emails, let me see that she had no contact. It didn't erase the past, but it offered some reassurance. She tried to re-earn my trust, bit by bit, though every now and then I'd still imagine them together, and that old fury would flare up. I'd snap at her, or shut down, or go for a long run. She'd endure it with pained eyes, probably knowing she deserved it. The revenge I once craved had mutated into something else. Survival. If I destroyed her, I'd destroy myself. Our lives were too interwoven. Our sons needed us both. So I taught myself a new lesson. You can punish someone for hurting you, but it doesn't necessarily set you free. Sometimes it just chains you to the pain. Months passed, and we found a fragile equilibrium. That's when I discovered I had a new perspective, one that replaced the helpless rage. I wanted to teach my boys something important. I sat them down one evening, They were confused, sensing there was some adult drama, but not knowing the details. I told them about honesty, about how lies can shatter a person's trust. In simpler terms, of course. I wanted them to grow into men who understood that loyalty matters. I also told them that sometimes, if someone's drowning in their own problems, they can drag you under with them, but you need to know when to swim for shore. They looked at me with solemn eyes, probably not grasping the full weight of my words, but I hoped it would take root. Jane was standing nearby, listening silently. When I caught her gaze, she gave me a small nod, tears glistening. She knew exactly what I meant. We said nothing more about it in front of the kids, but later that night, as we lay in bed, she whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on us. I know how hard this is. I know you might never fully trust me again, but thank you." I closed my eyes, feeling a dull ache in my chest. "I didn't do it just for you," I said softly. "I did it for all of us, including me. Because hate—" I paused, searching for the right words. Hate can become its own prison. She reached for my hand under the covers, and this time, I didn't pull away. We lay there in the darkness, listening to each other breathe. Two wounded souls trying to find a new way forward. In the end, that's what my revenge cost me. The illusions I once held. I couldn't simply walk away or burn her life down without burning my own. Instead, I found a path that forced us both to confront our flaws, our vulnerabilities, our regrets. It wasn't clean or neat. It hurt every single day. But it also cracked open a space where we might rebuild. I taught my sons how to recognize a lie, how to guard their hearts, how not to become the man I was, blind, complacent, taking everything for granted, nor the man Michael was, chasing momentary thrills at the cost of someone else's pain. I told them that if they ever find themselves in a situation where someone's drowning in their own poor choices, they have the right to walk away, to save themselves. But sometimes, if there's still love, you stay, knowing you could get pulled under all over again, but hoping you're strong enough to keep swimming. And that's where we stand now. Some days, Jane and I move with more ease, sharing laughter that feels genuine. Other days, the memory of her infidelity rears its head, leaving us both raw and uncertain. I don't know if time will fully heal what she broke. I only know that I refuse to let her drown me, refuse to become a bitter shell of a man, chained to rage forever. My revenge turned into something else, a chance to rise above the hurt, or at least learn to carry it without letting it define me. We'll see how it goes. Maybe we'll make it another year, or another 10, or the rest of our lives. Maybe we'll eventually decide we were too damaged to continue. All I know is that I'm here now, still fighting, still feeling the sting of betrayal every time I look at her and remember what happened. But I'm also remembering that once we were good. Once she was the woman I wanted to spend my life with, the woman who gave me my sons, the woman whose smile lit up my day. If there's any chance of salvaging that, I have to try. They say the only cure for pain is time or acceptance. I'm not sure I've found either yet, but I'm not ready to give up on the possibility. So I stand here, shoulders braced, heart bruised, trying to be the father my sons need, trying to be the husband who either forgives or walks away, but doesn't remain in that half-dead purgatory. I wash my hands again and again, sometimes for too long, like I can't quite rid myself of the memory. But each day, the sting of the hot water reminds me I'm still alive. I can still decide who I am, what I become after this. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of revenge that matters most.